Okay, so let's get on with it. Hi, my name is Julian, and what we're going to be talking about today is a little bit you may have seen earlier. A lot of people who were presenting in this conference were talking a lot about the exploitation, the attack portion. What we're going to do is come at it more from the point of view of investigation and how you hunt down in our case, a wireless moocher. Okay, so a little bit about my company, because since they sponsored me here, they expect that I do the obligatory plug. We're basically a IT security certification body for two certifications, the OSA and the OSWA, and we also do a lot of R&D work with regards to various security tools. And I think this is fading in and out. Tell you what, just to make things a little bit easier, I'm going to just raise my volume, so if you guys can't hear me, I will just let me know and I will actually speak louder, okay? So we also do things like penetration testing specifically, so if any one of you are interested in approaching us later on for any kind of training or penetration testing projects, please feel free to myself or my associate over there, okay?
Testing.
So, yes.
Sorry, just in case.
Okay, no problem. All right, first of all, let's get into the nuts and bolts of things. I'm actually going to give you a little bit of a practical demo later, okay? But we're just going to set the scene, give you a few definitions, all right, and give you the whole shebang and the reason why we felt compelled to release a tool like MoocherHunting. This definition is taken from the Free Dictionary. Obviously, a lot of you may be familiar with the term mooch, i.e. to steal. Most of you would probably look at it from the viewpoint of stealing internet access, but the internet access is actually just a small portion of it, because it's really the reason for someone stealing internet access can be very wide and varied, and I'll actually get through a few of those reasons in a bit. Essentially, unauthorized access of any wireless network is the aim of a moocher for whatever purpose, okay? And why is this possible? Well, you have things like unsecured access points. Obviously, if you ran a tool like AeroDump, a lot of you would be familiar with that tool, all right? It comes with the ACRAC suite. You would find a lot of open access points, okay? You'd also find weakly secured access points, i.e. those with web encryption, or even WPA PSK or WPA2 PSK encrypted access points, which have easy to guess passphrases, okay? So, yes?
Because we're doing the recording.
Yeah, okay, sure, no problem. All right, they insist I speak on the mic, okay, so bear with me. All right, and obviously we have access points or other kinds of wireless broadband routers with vulnerabilities, okay? So in all these three cases, you'd probably lead to a situation whereby a moocher would be able to take advantage of your wireless network. So the question has always been, how pervasive is this kind of activity? Well, this report over here on a news site called Channel News Asia, which is a fairly visited, fairly well-known website covering nothing but news. It's sort of like Asia's CNN, so to speak. They basically gave a stat that said moochers make up an estimated 5 to 10% of the wireless traffic, and they said that residential owners would be more vulnerable in many cases as compared to enterprise users. But the fact of the matter is a lot of enterprises are themselves not either securing their wireless well enough, i.e. they're relying on web and so on, or they are relying on things like WPA2 PSK or WPA PSK. Okay, so they are, in essence, if you can crack their wireless network, they're no better protected than a residential network. Now, the problem which really gave us pause for thought and led to the whole creation was the fact that there was a difficulty in tracking offenders. In fact, a lot of cases, like say, for example, if the BSA, the Business Software Alliance, or the RIAA were able to track an illegal file sharer or stream of file sharing down to a particular IP. That's about as far as they got. They got to the access point, or they got to the wireless broadband router, and then they had to do some forensics on the person who owned that wireless broadband router, and what happened is they couldn't find anything. Why? Someone had basically gotten onto the wireless network and started mooching and basically used their wireless network for illegal file sharing because they were pretty sure that no one would be able to bridge that what we call last mile between the access point and the actual attacker. Okay, so this particular guy over here, Gerald Tan, he was a very famous case. He was the first case in Singapore, right, to be actually arrested for mooching, all right? And his was pretty obvious. He was basically caught along the streets of Singapore at something like 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. with a laptop walking around going like that. So the question is really, a lot of people think, well, free internet access, no harm, no foul. I'm not bleeding you to death. I'm not creating any kind of inconvenience beyond just, loading up on your internet bandwidth. But then we start getting to a little bit more devious acts. For example, credential information theft. If I get onto your wireless network, obviously if I could, let's say, for example, break your wireless network using the Acrox suite, I could use AeroDump to basically start sniffing. But we could also do other things, like, for example, start sniffing off of your email login credentials and whatnot. I could also use your wireless access point and your broadband connection as a jump-off point for maybe controlling a whole series of botnets. Or maybe I could launch a DOS against a commercial entity because I was hired by someone to launch an attack against a commercial entity, and I didn't want to do it from my own wireless or broadband connection at home. Well, maybe what I want to do as an attacker is I want to go and file share because, hey, I believe in this whole file sharing thing. So therefore, I want to do that, but I know that they're coming down hard on people who infringe copyright. So I'm going to use my neighbor's wireless to go and do this. So I'm going to use some poor company's wireless to go and do this. Or perhaps, basically, they want to download Juarez or MP3s, okay? Subversive actions, for example, espionage, corporate espionage. You basically go through someone's wireless network and attempt to connect to your reverse access Trojans or IRC channels to control your botnets and so on. And of course, you've got things like terrorist activities. And if you think that that ain't real, the recent New Delhi or Bombay blasts in India basically were sort of carried out, and there was this particular family who claimed that their Wi-Fi was hacked because an email that was sent to claim responsibility for the blast was sent through their Wi-Fi. So basically, if you can think of whatever can be done using a wireless network to basically go about with any illegal activity, you can bet it's already happening, okay? We're pretty much playing a game of catch-up. So I presume that everyone out there is a good guy. There's no evil hacker out here, is there? Anybody? Anybody want to admit that they do sort of gray or black things? Well, probably not. So, in essence, we're facing a couple of problems. The attacker can choose the time and place of his striking. The attacker has multiple targets that he can choose. For example, if you go to any multi-tenanted residential or commercial block, you will end up seeing a lot of wireless networks in use. The attacker can hide in 3 dimensions. He can be anywhere in 360-degree radius in X, Y, and Z, okay? The attacker can encrypt his information going across the network. He may or may not be surfing or launching attacks while you try to hunt him down or while he's on the network. So how do we go about getting to him? And obviously, if you've got more than one wireless user, well, he can hide among those wireless users. So based on all the above, it does kind of look hopeless, doesn't it? Obviously, with all these things stacked against us, how are we going to go about trying to identify the actual perpetrator and bring him to justice? Well, before we actually start despairing, let's consider a few things, all right? So I'm going to take each case point by point. Firstly, although the attacker can choose the time and the place, they often follow a predefined behavior pattern. A lot of times they will go back to the same wells to drink. This is especially common where you have people who have, let's say, for example, engaged in illegal file sharing or peer-to-peer networks or doing things which involve a lot of bandwidth and traffic because they don't want to start finding a new drinking hole, so to speak. So they'll go back and revisit the same holes. The attacker has multiple targets. However, he still needs to have a station address, right? His wireless card still needs to have an address. Otherwise, he won't be able to communicate with the access point, and thus he can't go through to the network or anywhere else, all right? And of course, if he has Windows installed, if he's using WinXP and so forth, he most likely has a profile list. It's a short list where if you connect once, it gets stored in Windows XP automatically. So what happens is those become his preferred automatically connect to SSIDs, okay? Now, he can hide in 3 dimensions. But he is limited by a couple of things, right? The access point's transmit power is one of them. The sensitivity or the receptiveness of his wireless card. Now, if he's beyond a certain range, obviously he won't be able to communicate with the access point. So he has to be within a certain radius. Now, he may be able to use an extended range antenna to connect from maybe up to 1 kilometer away. But this is essentially no defense. In most cases, though, with most moochers, most people who want to use your Wi-Fi for illegal purposes, you're going to get them within a pretty much confined geographical radius. The only question is it X, Y, or Z axis? Okay. Now, people have said that the attacker can encrypt information across the network. However, when we talk about trying to identify his physical location, we're not looking at the kind of traffic that he's sending across, per se. We're looking basically at the volume of traffic and as long as he's sending traffic. Why? Because by the time you get to this point, you would have already determined that, okay, this person is doing file sharing. I've got it via an IP address. I can basically track you down via the ISP, request for the DHCP lease for this date and time, get you down to a particular geographical station, go and then do some forensics on your computer and find out that you aren't the owner. So what is that last mile, right? So in this particular case, once you can get to that last mile and you can actually get a hold of the actual attacker, then you can do the forensics on that. On his box or whatever it is he's using to access, all right? The attacker may not be active on the network. However, Windows boxes are notoriously chatty, right? NetBIOS traffic, Windows Update traffic. So you basically have the box betraying his position because it's got to send traffic across. And if it's a Linux box, well, you can basically send RAR packets, okay? Reverse Address Resolution Protocol. And if you're talking about the types of activities that he's doing, obviously some types of activities are a lot more chatty or voluminous, right? Especially peer-to-peer file sharing activities. And while the attacker can hide among many wireless users, in order to you have to be able to use the access, he still has to have a unique station address. Otherwise, based on the IEEE 802.11 protocol, everything breaks down. You're not actually able to connect to that guy. So the bottom line here is that to use the network, the wireless network, you basically have to have a situation where the attacker must reveal himself. He has to send, he has to receive data. And this sending and receiving of data gives him is basically a cruel choice as far as the attacker is concerned. The attacker can't hide his presence if he wants to use a network. If he wants to hide his presence, he can't use the network. So it's either use it, move on, or don't use it at all. And if he uses it, well, that's where the focus of this presentation comes in. Now, we've actually got some people coming to us saying that, well, you can't really track him, you know, because number one, there's all these things that are working against you. You've got reflection of wireless signals, you've got refraction, right? You've got diffusion. Basically, you've got all sorts of environmental factors that would attenuate the wireless signals. And of course, the attacker can always spoof an address, okay? He can basically say his address is 11111122222, which we all know is not something that most vendors would actually issue. However, right, we can get around all these problems simply through a little creative thinking. The first of which, apart from the tool, is that we have to use what we call a sprint and drift approach. Now, this was basically done by the submarines of the US Navy. What they do is very similar to how they do it. What they do is they actually go to a particular spot and listen, right? Spend a little time there listening, and then move off to another spot and listen over there. So that's the technique that you would have to use when using a tool that like MoocherHunting that we're going to actually show you in a little bit. And what this does is it actually allows you to take sampling readings from different points. And of course, because you can walk to whichever point, you would basically be able to take different samples from different points, and it would pretty much help you triangulate the position of the actual moocher. Okay? And of course, changing his MAC address is also not a problem. Why? In order to communicate with the access point, he needs to have a MAC address. He needs to, regardless of whether it's a spoofed MAC address, if he uses a valid one and he had to kick someone else off, you'll know about it. Why? He'll probably be running a tool like Air Replay with the deauthentication mode, which generates tons of packets. Okay? So in effect, it's very easy to spot. So let's take a look at the typical scenario. Okay? In this particular case, the attacker would attempt to access the LAN. Now, whether or not it's an open, unsecured access point, wireless network, whether or not he had to break your web encryption or WPA, PSK encryption, and so on, it's irrelevant. Basically, at this point, we're interested in him getting on and using your access point to mooch. So basically, he sends network traffic to your access point. However, because we all know this is wireless, they don't know where your access point is. It's not like you can follow the energy spikes along a Cat5 cable to get from point A to point B. He basically has to broadcast that traffic or send it and emanate it everywhere. Okay? And because he has to send it everywhere, if you have a tool that you can load on your laptop and that has the appropriate hardware to actually receive these signals, such as a wireless card, you can basically home in on his emissions, his RF emissions, okay? So for any of those of you who are, let's say, for example, familiar with the military, they have this thing called an anti-radiation missile. What it basically does is, if you're tracking a plane, you shoot a missile at the plane. If the plane has an anti-radiation missile, they'll shoot the missile back down towards the direction where the surface-to-air missile came from and knock the radar out. Basically, because that surface-to-air missile has to shoot down the plane, it needs a radar. If you can knock the radar out, you basically knock him out. This is the same approach that we're taking. We're homing in on the emissions of the wireless card, okay, of this 802.11 wireless card. Now, at present, or at least prior to this year, there was no tool that was actually specifically designed for the job of hunting users. Now, there were some commercial solutions, all right? Like, for example, you'd have various vendors who would position access points as sort of like sensors in a giant sensor net. But the problem with that is it's static. What happens if the guy is outside of your sensor net? You can't triangulate what's outside of your sensor net. Therefore, you have to be mobile. Okay? And of course, you could try to use a tool like AeroDump. If you look at the latest versions of AeroDump, basically the bottom part that actually has the a client connection with the BSSID or the access points, you could attempt to use AeroDump to actually track it down, but that would be a suboptimal solution. Okay? And you also have other vendors who basically tout iPACs or some other PDAs with wireless cards and omnidirectional antennas. The only problem with that is omnidirectional antennas are by their very nature designed to receive everything equally, all right, from all directions. It's not directional. It doesn't actually help you determine what signal is coming from what direction, okay? So in this case, the so-called RF donut, i.e. that pattern of RF receptivity and emissions, it may get flatter if it's high gain, you know, omnidirectional, but it is still a donut, all right? What you really need is some solution which is, number one, free, from the point of view of software, and which can use existing equipment, such as your laptop, your wireless card, or any other directional antenna that you have out there. So this leads us to the point of the presentation today, MoocherHunter. Now, we've released MoocherHunter earlier this year, but it was to a closed-door session of the Singapore police. So you guys are actually the first people outside of that closed-door session to actually get this in public, okay? It's dedicated tracking software that helps you hunt down anyone who is using a wireless network. It could be a legitimate user. It could be a moocher, all right? It doesn't matter. As long as he has a MAC address, a station address, and he's using your access point to send data across, basically MoocherHunter would enable you to hunt down his physical location. Now, MoocherHunter doesn't just rely on just pure data frames. It also correlates various other frames, for example, management frames and even control frames coming from the particular attacker. And as we all know, if you're doing any kind of 802.11 communications, you need control and you need management frames. So those also help you hunt the guy down. And best of all, obviously, it's free. Okay, we don't charge for MoocherHunter. It's available as part of the free auditing toolkit that you can download from that URL up there. Okay, unfortunately, for some of the people who were asking us whether we intend to provide it as a standalone tool, it's basically bundled in as a tool with the toolkit. Now, the reason for that is because it's actually more efficient for us to actually maintain the tool that way. Okay, so based on what I've mentioned, all right, you have the tool, you have the sprint and drift technique, and you need to have some relevant hardware. And that relevant hardware basically is just the last link in the chain. Now, MoocherHunter itself, the software, has an interface which is run on what we call ncurses, okay? And it's basically running off of your laptop. You look at this screen, and it gives you directional weighted cues as to where the attacker is, depending on where you're pointing your antenna. All right? Now, these directional weighted cues, which I'll show you when we get to the demo, basically allow you to gather quite a little bit of information with regards to how you would determine whether it's a reflected signal or whether it's really coming true from a particular direction or whether you're just actually going away from that particular guy. Okay? Now, this is a shot of the actual hardware. Obviously, that ain't me in the picture. That's my associate, Chris. You can see that he's using a directional antenna, much like this guy over here, all right? And he's actually got it connected to a a wireless card, PCMCIe card that's connected to his laptop. Now you can get any of these from eBay, or if you're feeling adventurous enough, we have a presentation on our website that you can download called How to Build Your Own Cantenna. You can make your own external antenna and then basically connect it to your wireless card. Okay, so you need all those things. You need the hardware, you need the tool, you need the technique, and pretty much with any kind of ingenuity, you can get all of them on the cheap. All right. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I am going to show you the interface of MoocherHunter. I'm going to show you MoocherHunter in action. And if we got time to spare, I'll give you an actual video of field trials that we actually did so you can see the technique in action. Okay. So give me a moment here while I bring up my console. Okay, as you can see here, is this big enough for everyone? Can everyone see, or do I have to make the font bigger? Everyone all right? Okay, I see lots of nods. Okay, that's good. So what we have here is MoocherHunter, the binary. Oops. Oh, that is too big. Yeah, all right. Let me just get that a little bit smaller because that needs to be displayed in format that you can see. All right, there we go. So MoocherHunter basically has a few flags, which are denoted over here, okay? There's an interface flag, all right, which basically tells your machine what interface you want to use MoocherHunter on, because obviously only one of your cards may have an external antenna jack. The chipset flag over there is absolutely required. And the reason for that is because different wireless cards actually have slightly different ways of handling certain readings when it comes to actually assigning those readings and presenting it to you on the interface. So depending on the type of card chipset that you have, you're actually going to have to select from Atheros, Prism 54G, and so on. Okay, so you actually have to know what chipset is inside your card. For those of you who are more familiar with the branding, i.e. Netgear, D-Link, and so on, you can actually find a list of chipsets and what models they fall under which cards on our website. I'll give you the link at the very end of my presentation. Okay. There's also another flag called -T, right, which basically specifies the BSSID of the AP, which you want to start doing your track on. Now, the reason for that is because you may not know the Moochers MAC address to begin with. What you want to see is you want to see how many people are actually connected to your access point. Whether they are legit users, whether they are Moochers, we don't know at this point. So what we do know is that you, as, let's say, the owner of the access point, running the access point, you would know your BSSID, you know your access point's MAC address. So you essentially put it inside here, and then from there you'll see who's associated with it. We have another flag, right? This is basically the what we call the active track version called -M. This is, let's say, for example, if you halfway doing your track, you notice that, wait a minute, this guy is not there anymore. Maybe he moved to a new access point. Instead of doing a -T, you now know his MAC address that you're trying to track, and you can assign -M, and then you actually track him, and you don't need to know which new access point that he's connected to. Okay? So we have some notes below to basically tell you what to do in the case of some of your wireless cards going down and whatnot, because we find that, especially with things like the Atheros Mad Wi-Fi NG drivers, they are very, very twitchy. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to make sure my card is in what we call monitor mode. All right, this is not strictly necessary, but I like to be safe rather than sorry. So let me just check. Nope. Okay, mode monitor. All right, so let me just do that again. All right, so you can see the difference. You saw the mode from manage changed to monitor now. So what we're going to do is we're going to run MoocherHunter. Let me just go up. Okay. At this particular point, I actually have an access point, and the access point's BSSID is located here. Okay, I've just keyed this in. You can see based on the flags that I mentioned, there's an interface. Because my wireless card is, my interface is designated ETH2, and it's a Prism 54G chipset. So I'm just going to hit enter on that. And you can see it's pretty fast. Why? Because it detected the access point fairly quickly. As you can see over here, the access point is actually dead smack in the center of your screen. Very easy. And the clients actually all radiate around it. Right now, I only have one client because this particular access point is obviously my demo one, unless someone else wants to hook on and basically I can start tracking them down. But this particular client appears to be connected. Okay, so what we do is before we do that, I just want to show you the help screen. All right, by pressing Shift-H, you can get a help screen which basically tells you everything you need to know about navigation and how to use the MoocherHunter tool from this screen, okay? So as you can see, it's pretty comprehensive. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to show you the actual tracking screen. So let me just hit the escape key. Now, unfortunately, we only have one. Oh, okay. Great, now we have two because someone else has apparently tried to connect on. Now, if I run my arrow keys up and down, I basically can swap between the two. So whoever you are, thank you very much. You just helped me at least make my presentation a little bit easier. And your arrow keys, the up and down arrow keys are the ones that select between the different clients that you have over there. Now, as this screen fills up, it fills up in a clockwise manner, so you can get a total of 9 clients that are connected here displayed. Once it goes beyond 9 clients, it goes to page 2. Okay, well, someone else is, is helping me do that. Let's see how many others we can get. But basically, once you get beyond 9 clients, your left and right arrow keys will basically swap between different pages. So as many clients as are connected over here, you basically have the ability to swap between the different pages to see whether there's any client that actually is not meant to be there. Because I would imagine that as a knowledgeable user who's using MoocherHunter in an enterprise environment, you would have a list of who is allowed to connect. What MAC addresses are actually you actually bought with regards to wireless cards and issued to your staff. So you would be able to identify using your whitelist. So I'm just going to hit the enter key because you can see it's highlighted on the very first guy. Okay? And what you can see here is the tracking display. Now the tracking display basically tells you that you're focusing on this one guy. And as frames are being received by your wireless card, each frame is assigned particular characteristics or particular readings based on your hardware. It's not based on the software. It's based on your hardware. So every hardware, let's say whether you've got a Netgear WG511, whether you've got an Atheros-based card, will basically assign its own readings. But you don't have to worry that the readings are like incompatible between cards, because for the duration of the track that you are doing right now, your card, the one that you currently have stuck inside the laptop, is the one that matters. So relative to him, everybody else is ranked. Okay, so let's say if you have a frame coming in that is very much weaker, this power value over here will actually fluctuate and will actually read at a lower rating based on what your card received. Okay, so as you can see, it's changing fairly often because every time you receive a frame, that reading will change. And you can see below that there's a max and a min. The max is basically a historical reading of the highest powered frame that you received, and the minimum is the lowest powered frame that you received. So it's basically values assigned by your card. This actually helps you because if you're pointing in a particular direction, say for example you're going like that, okay? And the power reading that you see at the very top, if it drops below 41, it will assign a new low. So you know that you're not going in the right direction, all right? So you point somewhere else, you basically would get the reading getting higher. You can see just now, the reading was down at about mid-50s, high 50s. And if I point somewhere over there, you can see that the reading is going a little bit higher. It's going to about 76-ish, okay? Now, obviously, as it tends towards the higher, the maximum figure, it means that you're pretty much pointed in the right direction. So what you need to be doing is you need to be moving towards that direction. Okay? Now there are 3 more little components or figures over here. They're called CMD. Anyone want to guess what these stand for? C, M, and D. Exactly. Control, management, and data frames. Now, as you can see here, we're getting a fair stream of data. So this guy is definitely, not only is he associated, he's also probably doing web surfing or whatnot, okay? And you can see some management frames. Now, you might not get any control frames or management frames. That's okay, because typically what we find is that the further you are away from the guy, the less likely you are to get the control frames and management frames. This is essentially a very interesting observation in actual practice, because theoretically, the IEEE spec says that before you can even send a data frame, you've got to make sure that your CTS and RTS is already all cleared. And those are control frames. So by rights, we should be seeing more. But in any case, it doesn't really matter because we can already see from the management and the data frames. And you can see the very last line over there. It says last 10 seconds, all right? This is the total number of frames that you have received, right, in the last 10 seconds, regardless of whether it's data frames, management frames, or control frames. So this pretty much tells you his activity level. If the last 10 seconds is pretty low, that means he's either taking a lull or his machine is offline and you're basically not getting anything. But of course, if you're getting something like that, then it is obviously something very interesting, okay? In essence, that he's pretty much active on your network. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to point this around, all right? And we're going to try to identify. Maybe what you guys can do is to help me identify and tell me when to stop moving this when you think I'm pointed in the right direction of the guy, okay? By just looking at the readings, all right? So just let me know when to stop. Just yell, okay? Anybody want to hazard a guess based on where I'm pointing? What you need to do is you need to see this relative to the power as I move. Okay, where it starts tending towards the 80 mark. Okay, like for example right there. Okay, so he's probably somewhere in that direction. Now, if you want to see whether he really is in that direction, we can prove it to you. Chris, could you get up and walk over there, please? So you can see, as he moves off, that rating that I'm pointing in that direction is going to start dropping. Can you see it's dropping? Because he's moving out of the field of the Yagi. Now, the Yagi, although it's directional, has some side lobes to actually receive the RF traffic. So now that he's moved off to a particular location, good Lord, I can't really see where he is. The light is shining in my eyes. Okay, I'm just going to sort of like spot him. Let's see where. Okay, he's looking like he's somewhere in that direction. Oh, yeah, okay, I can just see him right now, yeah. So you can see just by pointing the directional antenna and using MoocherHunter, you can pretty much tell which direction the guy is coming from. Now, obviously, in some cases, you might get a bounced packet, a reflected packet, okay? Typically, though, you can get around that. How so? Sprint and drift. Simply pluck yourself up from this location, take your laptop, walk to another location, and take a reading from there. And based on the locations, if you take a reading from each location, what you're going to end up with pretty much is, in essence, a triangulation effect. This location, you point there. If you walk over that side, most likely you're going to get a reading on that direction. So pretty much as you walk around, you get more and more triangulation readings, and you can pretty much walk towards accurately where the guy is. Now, in actual field trials, we got down to a positional accuracy of about 2 meters, all right? And this was in very, very high density environments. We're talking about basically high density residential environments like condominiums, HDB flats, which for those of you who aren't from Singapore, HDB is like massive public housing where they got like 400 people in a block, that kind of thing, 400 units in a block. And also in office environments down at Shenton Way, i.e. right downtown in the heart of the business district. So this is pretty much a tool that you can use. Of course, you have to use it, again, with a directional antenna so that you know which direction he's coming from. And this tool would allow you to pretty much hunt down anyone who is using your wireless, okay? So it doesn't really matter if they are in a, let's say, for example, in a secured land, they maybe used air crack to break into your web-protected access point and are using it now. Because in the case, if any of you are using arrow dump right now, you would be able to identify that this access point that we're using is actually web protected, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to exit out of here, right? And okay, there's nobody else, so I can't show you the page too, but you get my drift. Basically, if you hit the Shift H, okay, and you move the left and right arrow keys, you'll move to basically a next page list of detected stations, all right? So at this point, are there any questions with regards to how we would actually sort of point it around, how we would actually point or use the MoocherHunter software when we're actually conducting a track? Yes? Okay, the D in the bracket is basically the first frame that was detected, which in the case of a data frame, right, we put there, if a data frame is the first thing that gives away the presence of that station associated to your access point, it will have a D over there. Now, if it was any other frame, it wouldn't have anything. The reason for that is because a data frame would indicate that the guy is actually sending traffic and he's active. If he's just associated but he's not active, he could be basically taking a coffee break, or it could be that you got a stray frame, right, and he's just turned off his computer. So the ones with the Ds are the ones that are actually the more active guys. Okay? Any other questions before I move on? Okay. Oh, all I need is 2 more. Anybody got 2 more laptops? Then we can pretty much go and show you the page 1 and page 2 stuff. It's all right. I'll let it run. Okay. And whoops. Okay. Right now we have that video to show you. I'm doing pretty good on time actually, so I can probably take a lot longer with the video. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show you the video of the actual field trial testing that we did with MoocherHunter. Okay, and bear in mind that this is done in a multi-tenanted residential environment. So there's lots of concrete, there's lots of steel, there's lots of interference with other APs around. But you'll see basically how the thing goes. Right, so now Chris is about to go out the door, and we're going to take a look just to show you where he's moving off to. So he's currently going to look for a position where he could potentially mooch from, right? So we're just going to go back and close the door so that we don't actually see where he's going to, and then hunt him down. See you, Chris. Our laptop with a highly directional antenna. You can see that I'm actually connected to a wireless card with an external antenna jack. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to go and find out where Chris has gone to. Okay? So work with me. You can see what I'm doing over there is I am actually going to a spot, rotating around on that spot. That's the drift right there, okay? And I'm taking readings, and of course, MoocherHunter tells me that he's in a particular direction. Now what I'm going to do is I'm coming towards the camera. That's the sprint. So you can see this is an illustration of the technique. I go to a spot, I take a reading, I identify that he's coming from a particular direction, and then I move to another spot to attempt to get another reading to triangulate which direction he's likely to come from. Seems to be coming from downstairs. Okay, I'm going to go and see whether he actually is downstairs. Most likely he might be hiding in some sort of apartment or something. It looks like he's still below. Aha! We have found someone. There you go. Here's the moocher. So, how far below are we right now? 3 floors? Yeah, something like that. Okay. So there you go. MoocherHunting. Okay. So that was just a short illustration as to the technique. So you've seen the interface, you've seen the tool, you've seen the technique. Now, the key thing is really how easy is it to hunt the guy down. For that, principally you have to rely on the user's, what we call the skill level, because you have to understand how to execute that track. You have to use the sprint and drift approach. If you're just going to sit down in one location and just rotate on that location and then say, aha, he's coming from that direction, chances are, in a highly built-up environment like that, you're not going to get very far. In fact, you're probably going to go off in the wrong direction. So you got to actually use a multiple, at least 5 readings go to 5 different locations. And don't forget, he's in a 3-dimensional environment. He could be 1 floor up, 1 floor down. So don't forget to point your antenna up or point your antenna down, okay? You also have to understand or get familiarized with the interface that I showed you just now. The interface is really simple. I mean, we just breeze through it like that. It's not rocket science. Bigger numbers mean better. Smaller numbers mean you're wrong, you're going away from it, okay? So collectively, when you talk about how you look at the software, interpret the results, use the technique, that's basically your skill level, and how effective a Moocher Hunter will be for you will be how high or how good your skill level is. Now, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, or alluded to earlier, with that exact same setup that you saw in the video, and the same setup that I have over here, we basically were able to identify a moocher on average between 10 to 30 minutes, all right? And this was conducted across both residential and office environments. However, depending on the amount of traffic that he sends out, it can be as little as 5 minutes. And if you're using things like, for example, peer-to-peer file sharing, or even just simple web serving, you'll be surprised the number of frames a simple HTTP GET request will churn out. It really helps you, okay? And of course, we have all the other requirements such as your hardware and so on. So in essence, Moocher Hunter will allow you to hunt down anyone who uses your wireless access point, and anyone can use this. You could be an enterprise, a system administrator running your own wireless networks in your offices or your organizations. You could be a home user and you don't like the idea of your neighbor mooching your internet access because you paid $100 a month for. So you might want to sort of look at it from both angles, whether or not you're a home user, whether or not you're an enterprise user. Okay. Now, for those of you who are interested, I mean, we do cover this in the certification program that I mentioned earlier, but that's not the focus of what I am talking about today. Now, there is a footnote to this whole thing. Okay, and the footnote is this: law enforcement, when we previewed this to them, they said that, yeah, that's all nice and good. I mean, we can find out sort of who's using the wireless and so on and so forth. But isn't this a little bit obvious when you walk around? It's not exactly covert, is it? The guy sees me coming and he says, okay, what is that guy pointing? It's a man in black or men in blue and with a badge, man with a badge and gun, and he's pointing that at me. Well, that's pretty obvious. And as a result, it tends to give away the whole game that he's being tracked. So the response that we gave to them was something that we called the Law Enforcement Edition, and basically this added a few other things in, all right, 802.11a support, because by and large, most people tend to use the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum. So you'll find very few A cards in the market today, which is why we didn't put that into the basic edition, but we've actually put it into the law enforcement edition because you never know what criminals will do. All right, and we also have other stuff like AP hunting, evidence logging, because they need to do that. However, most people, based on the feedback we've received, have basically said that this for enterprise and home users is pretty much sufficient. Okay, so you may want to go back and test it in your environments, whether or not you're a public listed company or whether or not you're running it at home, and basically have a play with it. All right, so like I mentioned up there, the commercial solution is really intended for cops, so I can't talk about it here, but you can always ask me about it offline later on, okay, after this. So at this point, I think we're actually making pretty good time. So I have about 15 minutes left. Anybody want to ask me anything at all about that? Because like I illustrated to you, it's a really, really simple tool to use. The only thing you really need to do is just get an external directional antenna, have a wireless card that accepts external jacks. In fact, you can even put it onto your onboard cards. Your mini PCI Centrinos, for example, they're supported. You just pop the cover off of your wireless card and you put the jack in, and there you go. Anybody has any questions at all? Yes? No?
Hi, I have a question here.
Yes.
So what if I have a wireless card adapter that allow me to change the power dynamically? Like can I adjust the power low and high? I mean, does it really matter?
Okay, it doesn't really matter. Well, to answer your question in full, based on you were asking me whether you can change the power dynamically. You can't set the power from your user interface, at least not based on the tool that we have. But it doesn't matter because when you are using that single card and when you are actually doing the track, your card is responsible for assigning what it feels are the relevant signal strengths that for each frame that it receives. As a result, that sort of gauge or that scale that it's using is going to be constant all the way throughout the lifetime of your card. And therefore, when you actually point it, let's say, in this direction, and if you point it in that direction, you can make a very accurate assessment of the difference in signal strength between that direction and the difference between that direction. So it doesn't really matter whether or not you can or can't change your power rating, even if you could, but in this case, it doesn't matter. Oh, okay. In this particular case, we're actually, like I mentioned, using a variety of means to sort of assess whether the traffic is coming from that particular guy. Number one, obviously, when you saw the initial screen about how he's associated with an access point, we're looking at control frames, we're looking at management frames, we're looking at data frames to determine that it's coming from that guy. We're also using something that we call the 2DS flag. Now, if you're aware of the IEEE spec, the 2DS flag basically, if it's set to 1, all right, it's going towards the distribution system, i.e. it's going towards your access point. And those are the ones that we're interested in. Why? Because it's coming from the client, going towards your access point. So we're only interested in those. We're not interested in the ones that come from your access point because we're not tracking the access point. Right. Yes? Sorry? Mac, as in MacBook Pros and... Oh, OS X. Okay, this is basically bundled into a free tool that we call the Oswald Assistant. It's a live CD. So you can basically plug it into your MacBook because we've had a report by someone who actually said that they loaded in the CD-ROM that they downloaded from a website into the MacBook. You don't have to install it. The whole idea is that you don't install this tool. You run it off of a dynamic environment, the live CD environment. You boot up from your CD, and basically it runs just like that. So you don't have to mess around with installing software. You don't have to mess around with, let's say, reformatting your hard drive and whatnot. Yeah, exactly. No, we don't run this in virtual machines. The reason for that is because VMware at this point, the wireless support is not exactly that great, especially for the PCMCIA cards. For USB, yeah, the cards are okay, but I would strongly recommend that you do not run it under VMware, actually, because it's a lot faster if you run it native. And in any case, it was designed to be run native and not under VMware. Any other questions? Anybody at all? Yes. Sorry, I can't really hear that. Okay, so what you're asking me is, how easy is it for the Moocher to defeat this tool? Okay, like I mentioned with Mac spoofing, right? Let's take a look at that case in point. If I'm a Moocher, and let's say I want to spoof as a legitimate user, let's say, for example, I run AeroDump, and I see you have a list of legitimate users connected to the access point. And what I want to do is I want to assume his identity. Well, I got to knock that guy off first, don't I? If I knock that guy off, I got to use deauthentication attacks against the valid client to knock him off so that he goes away and I assume his identity. Because you can't have two guys trying to communicate in the same way. Your AP is basically going to say, hey, you know, what the hell? So that token alone will cause the valid user to say, how come I can't connect? I'm getting all these problems. And so they're going to end up talking to the system administrator, and they're going to say that, wait a minute, you know, I can't access, is that a problem? And then the system administrator, if he runs a tool like MoocherHunter, would basically say that, no, you are connected. And then the guy says, no, I'm not here. And as a result, you're then saying, this is the attacker, the Moocher, who's basically trying to knock you off to basically get on and use the access point for whatever reason. So that's one condition. The second condition is if the Moocher assumes, let's say he changes his MAC address to something from 000E35, which is an Intel Centrino vendor front end, to let's say 1111111. It doesn't really matter because he still needs to talk to the access point. And I'll track him based on 111111. I won't track him based on 000E35. So in both cases, MAC spoofing is no defense because he still has to connect to the access point. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions? Okay. If there are no other questions, I'd like to thank you for your time and your attentiveness. I really appreciate it because it's late in the day. I know everyone's sleepy after the coffee breaks. But if you have any questions at all, please feel free to drop into the corporate mailbox, and they'll get routed to me on this presentation. If you need more info, it's all listed down there. MoocherHunter. There's also a short video for you that you can actually download and take away and use it as a reference guide to how to run MoocherHunter. And of course, the MoocherHunter tool is also available from that download link, the Osmo Assistant. All right, it also contains other tools, like I mentioned, like AeroDump, AirCrack, and whatnot. It's a collection of wireless tools. And of course, if you guys ever get interested in getting formal training, but I don't think any of you would probably be interested in that. So if there are no other questions, I will be available outside for any personal Q&A if anyone's too shy. But I thank you very much for your time, and hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Mr. Julian Ho. Our next presentation in this track will be talking about Mac OS X